All right, so welcome to our weekly workshop. My name is David Raymond. I'm the director of the Virginia Cyber Range and the US Cyber Range. My email is on the slide if anybody wants to reach out. So this is an ongoing weekly series we do each Tuesday afternoon, and these videos are all posted to our YouTube channel within, I don't know, a day or two. We have to do a little bit of editing and uploading, but within a day or two, these go up to our YouTube channel. And we spent some time talking about CTF, several weeks, a couple of months actually, talking about capture the flag and the Cyber Range Cloud CTF platform, which is great. Hopefully that was useful to people. We'll go back to CTF probably at some point, but we don't want to do nothing but CTF all the time. So we've switched it up a little bit. We did some regular expression content over the last couple of weeks, and then last week we did network scanning with Nmap. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to continue some lessons from a course called Introduction to Command Line Interface, and this is a continuation of a series that we started back in 2020 on the Linux command line interface. I think this is something that's useful to educators who are introducing their students to the Linux operating system. And so I mentioned we're continuing a series that we started back in 2020. So you can find the previous recordings on our Virginia Cyber Range YouTube channel. There are, I'll bring you to them here in a minute, but if you go to youtube.com/@Virginia Cyber Range, and then under the playlists, you can find the playlist that is titled Intro to Command Line Interface. And I'll switch over to my web browser. So here I am at the Virginia Cyber Range YouTube channel. And if I go to playlists, there is a Intro to Command Line Interface. And it looks like there's 20 videos here.
It's hard to believe Mint's new family.
There's an advertisement. And so this is, again, 20 videos that are introductory videos on the Linux command line. And I'm going back to my slides here. I'll show you where those lessons come from. The lessons come from the Cyber Range courseware repository. So both the Virginia Cyber Range and the US Cyber Range have these lessons in our courseware repository. The course author is Matthew Vogel, who's a instructor at Tidewater Community College in Norfolk, Virginia. And he created this content back in 2019, 2020 timeframe. And it is a really nice and relatively detailed introduction to command line interface. So I'm going to jump into our courseware repository, and let's go to courseware. So you can find this both on the US Cyber Range and the Virginia Cyber Range website. I'm going to do a search here for introduction to the command line, and here we have a course, introduction to the command line interface. There are several modules, and these are the previous modules are in that YouTube channel that I just showed you. So everything up through module D, I think, is in the YouTube channel. Today we're gonna skip processes and services. Module E, we're gonna skip over that. We'll come back to it later. But what I thought was maybe a little bit more interesting was module F, editing files. So if I go into module F in the repository, editing files, and there are 4 lessons in this module. So today we're going to talk about using Nano at the command line to edit files. And then over the next 3 weeks, we'll talk about using VI parts 1, 2, and 3. And these lessons are all available here in the courseware repository. So if I go into the Nano lesson, if I log in, so I could log in here and I could download the course content here. And what you'll find in each one of these command line interface lessons is a lesson plan. So here's the Nano lesson plan. Then there's a set of presentation slides, and those are the slides that I'm going to use today. It's a dozen or so slides. And then there's a there's a exercise using Nano lab exercise. And so you just click on one of these, you can download the content and use it with your students. And again, the earlier modules you can find on our YouTube channel. And they are in the Intro to Command Line Interface playlist. So they're all
When it comes to citing source,
sitting right over here. All right, so with that, back to my slides. All right, so using Nano. So why do we care about Nano? So we often have to edit files from the command line interface, right? So some of our CyberRange environments are terminal environments where you have access to a Linux terminal. You don't have access to a desktop environment where you would be able to open up some other GUI text file editor. So the only choice you have is to edit files from the command line, and there are a couple of tools to do that with. The easiest one, the one I'm going to talk about today, is this one called Nano, and it's a great tool. And if you have to use it, this is and if you're not familiar with doing this, the command line Nano is really a great choice. And it's so again, I mentioned that some of the CyberRange environments only give you a terminal interface, and that's certainly the case in in the real world of cybersecurity professionals, right? So there's often times where you're going to interact with a service, with a server somewhere, and you depending on how you connect to it, you might you're often connecting to and interacting with servers using SSH, and when you SSH into a system, you're at a terminal window, and you have to be able to use the text editor that's installed on that target device in order to interact with it. And so a tool like Nano is super useful in that context. And then sometimes you are doing something like you're doing a penetration test, and you are somehow gaining unauthorized access to a terminal in a target system. And when you do that, it's the same rules apply, right? You're almost never gonna have access to a desktop interface. You're almost always gonna have access to some sort of a terminal window, and that's when you have to be able to edit files at the command line, and that's what Nano is used for. And so when you run Nano, we're going to see it here in a minute. When you run it, it essentially takes over the terminal window. So now, when you run Nano, the whole terminal window is now your text editor, and you use it to edit files. And then when you're done, you can save the file and close Nano, and then you're back at the command line. So we'll see that here in a minute. There's a menu. Nano is easy to use because there's a menu at the bottom of the screen, and I'll show you this in a minute. And the menu has a bunch of different commands that you can execute, like loading files, saving files, exiting the interface. You can find, you can do a find, you can do a search and replace. It has all the sort of standard text editor features. And there's a menu at the bottom of the screen that lists all those features, and we'll see that menu here in a minute. And a lot of the commands are prepended with this caret symbol, and the caret symbol means control, right? So the first menu item you'll see is caret G, and that's the help menu. So if you hit Control G, that's going to get you to help, and we'll see that here in a minute. So that's what Nano is: terminal, command line, text editor, and lots of times you have to be able to edit files from the terminal, and this is a great tool for it. Okay, this is what it looks like. So again, there's this menu down at the bottom, and you see that Nano has taken over this terminal window, and I'll show this live here in a second. Easiest way to start Nano is just by typing Nano at the command line, right, at the terminal window command line. If Nano is installed, it will start with a blank file. You can also start Nano and open a file by using Nano with the name of the file, right? So that's similar to many other command line utilities. You use the name of the tool that you're using, and then a file name that you're going to interact with, and you open the file that way. If no file with that name exists, then a new file is going to be created, So you can start, so you can actually create a file using Nano, and a new file, when you start Nano, a new file will be created. Then when you save what you've entered, then that new file will contain whatever you put in there. It's important to remember that if you're using Nano to edit a configuration file or some other file that's only accessible by the root user, then you have to use the sudo command in order to interact with that file, or else you'll get an error. You'll get some sort of an unauthorized access error. Here's an interesting tidbit, and I'll demonstrate this. So Nano, by default, does not have mouse support. So if I just type Nano in the file name and start interacting with the file, there's no mouse support. So if I have a large file, I have to use cursor keys to maneuver around in that file to get to where I want to be. Nano, however, does support a mouse if you are in a situation where you have a mouse, and sometimes that's the case, right? And if you're interacting with a terminal on the cyber range, for example, you have a mouse, and you can maneuver the mouse around over the Nano window, and Nano supports the use of the mouse if you use the -M option when you open up Nano. So then you would use Nano and then -M and then the file name. And once you have Nano opened up, then it's really straightforward, right? You can use arrow keys to move around. You can use the backspace and delete to delete text. You can use page up, page down. It's pretty straightforward in terms of how you use it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to a terminal window, and I'm actually using a Linux terminal in my Windows 11 desktop computer. If you want to try any of this, all you need is a Linux terminal, right? So you could use a Virginia Cyber Range or a US Cyber Range Linux environment, Ubuntu or Kali, or in just about any Linux distribution is going to have Nano installed. I'm using the Ubuntu Linux for Windows, and that's installable on any Windows 10 or 11 system. So if you just Google Linux terminal for Windows, you'll find instructions on how to do this, and that's what I'm going to use for my example here. So this is a Linux terminal, and I'm going to type in Nano, and this is what I get, right? It's a new file, and I haven't given it a name. What I see here again down the bottom is the menu. First thing on the menu is get help, so I can hit Control-G to get help, and then the next thing here I see here is exit. Then there are things like write the file out, so Control-O is write out, Control-R is read file, Control-W is where is, Control/ is replace. So it's convenient in the sense that all the basic controls are listed right here at the bottom of the window, and if I hit Control-G, I get lots more information, right? So I can use the up and down arrow keys to navigate this window, and you'll see a variety of different menu items, right? So there's a menu at the bottom of the screen. That's not all of the menu items. That's just sort of the most widely or most commonly used ones. So you see here you have the -G, so the caret is control, as I mentioned before. So -G, -X, -O, those are the standard functions. You'll see some controls in here that have the M in front of it. So M, so meta, the meta key, and U, meta E, meta A, meta 6. The meta key on a Windows keyboard is the Alt key, and the meta key on other devices is something else, right? On a Linux device, it's probably the Alt key. If you're on a Mac, I'm not sure what the button is. It might be the command button or something. You'd have to try it out. But Alt is the meta key on a standard sort of Windows keyboard. Okay, so this is the help. I hit Control-G to get to the help, and now to get out of the help, I can hit Control-X and close it. So I hit Control-X. And if I want to exit the Nano editor, I hit Control-X, and now I'm back to the command line. I mentioned before that I could create a new file. and I just put in Nano and then the name of the file, right? And now I have a named file, which is an empty file because there's no file in my current directory, and I can put in here. I can start typing, right? This is a test file. Here is a line. There is another line. And a third line. Okay, so now I've got some content in my file, and if I hit Control X, this asks me, do I want to save my modified buffer? All right. So this is my new file. I just wrote some stuff in it. I hit Control X without writing the content out first. And so it asks me if I want to save the buffer, and I say yes, right? I hit Y. And then I can leave. Oh, it asked me for the file name, right? For the file name to write, temp_file.txt. Okay, and now I've written the file. So if I do ls, I can see the file. And if I cat it, there's my content. Okay, so that's the basics of editing a file using Nano. I also mentioned the -m option, right? So if I again use Nano with temp file, you know, I have my mouse here, but if I click the mouse, I don't get any love from the mouse in the file. I can't move the cursor to somewhere else using the file. Now in a short file like this, I can just use the arrow keys and get around easily. Obviously, if I have a long file, it would be more challenging. So what I can do is I can use Nano with the -m option, which gives me mouse support. And now I can click somewhere, and you know, if I click at the end of this line, I can easily move the mouse to new places, and just makes it easier to navigate. Now I can hit Control O and write the text file out, and hit Control X, and I'm out. So that's really the basics of Nano, and you can do probably, I don't know, 90% of what you need to do with what I just talked about. I will hit a couple more slides here. I talked about Control G to access the help. You can hit Control V and Control Y to go up and down, Control N to go to the next line, Control P to go to the previous line. So you can use the control keys to navigate around, but you can do the same thing with arrow keys and page up and page down. So if you have a keyboard that has all that extra stuff, page up, page down, arrow keys, etc., then it's just as easy to do that. Some people use very limited keyboards with not a lot of keys on them. Mostly those are keyboards that like programmers use. And if you're a programmer and you're using a keyboard that doesn't have arrow keys and stuff, then you can use the control keys. But you know, most of the world has a standard keyboard, and you'll be able to get around with no problem. Again, you use Control O to write out the file, and if you didn't name the file when you started, then when you hit Control O, you're going to get a blank. You know, it says file name to write, and then you have to type in the file name. Otherwise, the file name will be there, and if you just hit enter, it'll do what it needs to do. And then to open a file, you can hit Control Shift R, and that's gonna read a file from the current directory. So if I were to start Nano without putting in a file, then I could do Control Shift R, and it's gonna ask me for a file name, and I can use tab. I can use tab complete here, just like I do at the Linux command line. So I type a few characters and then hit tab. It's going to fill it in, and there's my file again. You can search for things. So hit Control W. So if I'm at the top of my buffer, I can hit Control W for where is, and if I typed in line, for example, that's going to go right to the first occurrence of the word line. And then if I hit after that, if I hit meta W, then it's going to go to, and again, meta is the alt key. It's going to search for additional occurrences of that specific thing, right? So Control W for the first time that you want to find a particular line, and then after that, if you use Alt W, then it's going to find additional occurrences and it's going to wrap around. So easy to find specific words within a long block of text. And then to cancel search, you can hit Control C, and that's going to get you back to edit mode. So if I hit Control C, now I'm just editing the file again. You can cut text. So Control K will cut a line. Will essentially remove a line of text, and so a line is going to disappear, and then the next line is going to move up, and then you can use U to uncut the text. So if you want to remove a line and then insert that line somewhere else, then use Control K and Control U to do that. So if I wanted to move this line, if I hit Control K here, that line is now gone. And then if I wanted to insert it down here, then I hit Control U, and that's going to move that line of text. So cut is Control K, and then paste is Control U. Okay, and that's it for Nano. And we're at about 22 minutes, which is perfect. There's a lab exercise that you can download from the web page. Again, it's this using Nano, and each one of these lessons on the command line has a lab. So if you have a classroom full of students and you want to do and you want to go through this Linux command line stuff with them, then it's great for sort of a lesson a day. You spend 10 or 15 minutes on a lesson, and then you give them a lab, and here's the lab exercise for Nano, where you can see it here. And it's, log into the cyber range, and then open a terminal window, start Nano, type in some stuff. So it just sort of walks through a lot of the things I just talked about, but has the student doing it hands-on in a Linux terminal window. All right, so any questions on any of that? Comments? So you saw that Nano is really straightforward and easy to use, pretty self-explanatory, and commonly installed on Linux distributions. I wouldn't say it's universal, right? It's commonly installed. You'll see it in a lot of places. Next time, we're going to talk about a command line editor called VI. VI is I would say quicker than Nano, right? You can VI is designed to have you keep your hands on the home row on the keyboard, and so VI is pretty widely used by people who use Linux a lot, right? Because you can easily edit files and not have to move your hands around to find the control key or find the arrow keys or whatever. You essentially do everything from the home row. I will say that VI is less intuitive, right? So there's a little bit more of a learning curve for VI. So we'll talk about VI for a couple of these sessions. Another benefit of VI is that it's basically, you'll find it on almost every Linux distribution that you ever interact with. Anytime you log into a Linux device, almost always you're going to find VI. That's not the case with Nano. Nano is there most of the time, but certainly not all the time. But VI is everywhere. So people who are penetration testers, they have to know VI, because if you gain access to something and you're on a terminal, you're generally not going to be in a position to install software on that system, but the VI editor is going to be there, and you'll be able to use VI if you're going to try to edit any files. All right, I'll stop there. Any final comments, questions? All right, here's some resources for you. Here you'll find the links to our knowledge base, to our YouTube channel, where you'll find all the previous episodes on the command line interface. And if you have questions or comments, here's our customer support line for both Virginia Cyber Range and US Cyber Range. And look forward to seeing you all next week. So thanks.